Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode. I got a really fantastic guest for you today, John Chan, and he's an entrepreneur with a passion for user experience design, and he's CEO and co-founder. And we're going to talk about SaaS, e-commerce. He's also competed in Olympic Taekwondo, which we also share, and we're going to talk about teamwork in business. And I'm really happy to have him on the show and showcase his brand. So, John, welcome.
Chris, thanks for having me. Super excited to be here.
Yeah, I know it's a small world. We know that we have Zoom and the internet and we have Podmatch. So talk about, set the stage for your story and background, and we'll dive right into it.
For sure. Thank you. I start off by saying that I come from an immigrant background. So I moved to Canada when I was 6. I grew up here, and my entrepreneur journey started when I dropped out of school at 19. At the time, I was a bit of an accident. I was disenchanted with school. I didn't know this at the time, but turns out as an adult, I had ADHD.
Wow.
So I was bored at school. But during that time, I read this book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, and it sent me this direction of thinking about minding my own business and thinking
Yeah.
through what is it that I really want. And at the time, perhaps naively so, I wanted to retire before I was 30. So that was the thought process. And so I started off by thinking of what kind of skills I had in high school, which was building websites. And I
Yeah.
started freelancing at 19. And it sent me on this path of being a user researcher and user experience designer to running my own consultancy, doing conversion rate optimizations for different brands and businesses, all the way to fast forward to nowadays. I run a growth marketing agency with my wife where we help e-commerce and software businesses with running their paid social and paid search campaigns to grow and help them generate new sales. Yeah, I'll pause there, but that's like the background. Started off with marketing and design, then got into software and transitioned to marketing.
Yeah. And I love that. I think some of the best skill sets to have are able to create websites and then also like social media marketing and now coding. These are all fantastic skills to have because most people don't know how to do that. So they come to you. And what's interesting is this idea of because you integrate user experience design. And then, so talk about how that's used, that skill and that interest led you to work for companies like UBC, Basecamp, and then ultimately on your own.
For sure. It all started with just recognizing that the things that I was building back then when I was building websites, that there were people behind the scenes. And a lot of the progression from in my career, from going from designing to writing software to marketing, it was all figuring out what the next phase of the skill set that was missing was. And so when I first started building websites, it wasn't long before it dawned upon me that, oh, if I'm making a change on the site, it impacts somebody on the other side. And my first job was working with UBC. It's one of one of the largest, most prominent universities in Canada, where I was working as a developer. But it it was one incident was interesting where I remember I was answering phone calls, helping with system support, like system maintenance, tech support, and somebody was asking for a password change, and I noticed that on the web page that the reason why they called that particular number was because it was an error message that showed up. And that one department that I worked with was in support of 11 different branches, whereas and it was we were always inundated with calls. And so when I noticed that was the message that showed up, I changed the number to a different department where it was basically had more support, and it basically helped impact the stress levels of that particular group. And so it just like incrementally making me realize that, oh, if I studied the process and the path that people took, I could have more lasting impacts and changes. And so it went from working at the university to eventually recognizing how I can help them support with increasing donors, increasing their and being more clear about their mission, to working for profit companies and recognizing that if I made the same type of user experience changes and improvements, that had real impact to their bottom lines. And that's when I started exploring different softwares and different companies, partly because that was my interest at the time. I was looking at a lot of different designers and where the well-known designers are. And Basecamp at the time was one of a very prominent software company. They're the inventors behind the Ruby on Rails software movement, and also just a general idea of running business remotely. And so I was lucky to be able to work with them, learn under the wings, and see how they operated. And that was all came from figuring out the next problem incrementally from the skills that I had at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating. And at the end, I want to talk about how all these skill set shaped your entrepreneurial journey. And your agency, 2X Growth Agency, it specializes helping e-commerce and DTC brand, that's direct to consumer brands, grow. So what unique strategies do you employ to manage such a large ad spend effectively and drive significant revenue for your clients.
For sure. So nowadays, when we do marketing, we always think about marketing as sales at scale. And so the precursor to any effective or successful marketing campaigns always boils down to having a fantastic and strong product. And so whenever we're having those discussions, and it came from the user experience research skills, where I was interviewing it and monitoring and seeing the gap between how a company presents itself versus how end consumers or end users perceive what the company is about. And so marketing campaigns nowadays often boils down to us studying and understanding what the real reasons are for what motivates people to buying a particular product or service. And we see that from customer reviews, we see that from competing reviews, we see that from looking at the search experience or a social experience that someone would have, from looking at how do they go about finding and buying products, and then seeing how our product for a particular brand or company that we're working with fits into that mix. And then in our ad creatives or ad copy, we would just highlight those things where they otherwise would have overlooked it or forgot about it. And a small example would be, for example, a lot of the work we do today is producing and creating thumb-stopping ad creatives. And we take, if someone's seeing on their Instagram feed or on their social feeds and they're introduced to a product for the first time, we basically think about what experience a successful customer would have had
Mm.
from being introduced to the product, reading the landing page, buying a product, receiving it, and successfully consuming and being happy with the result. And we just capture that experience in video form and we present that in an ad so people can future pace in their head what the experience would be had they bought from it. And so a large part of it is just spreading that message. And again, it goes back to the original point of why marketing is sales at scale, right? It's about seeing how someone would have been sold in a at a micro level so that we can scale that on a macro level.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. But it would, like I said, it's all about scaling. And then the other question is, so entrepreneurial wise, you've had some challenges. It's like entrepreneurship is not for the faint of heart. And in your experience, what are the most common challenges entrepreneurs face in the digital space, and how can they address them?
There's a lot of different things why business will not work, right? And so I think for my own journey, I think uh, from the different businesses that I've had to the ones that are worked really well versus the ones that have not, I think of the few conditions that lead to success. And for a while, it took me a long time to learn this one aspect about my skill set and myself. And it made me realize that when I look at other founders and entrepreneurs, I see that sometimes they have a lot of blind spot in the same way that I had, which really boils down to a lot of us have unique strength and skill sets and weaknesses that we otherwise would not have recognized. But if you go back to your childhood, if you look back at your journey of growing up, the conditions that led you to pick certain choices or certain paths, they're really signs for what you're really good at. And a lot of part of running a business is recognizing how could you apply the things that are uniquely skills that you develop that make you unique that you're really good at, and just
Yeah.
keep focusing on those and applying that in a work environment, and then finding partners or hires to bridge all the gaps that see the condition of a successful business. A lot of it really comes down to that now. And so, even as I think about why we run an agency today, a large part of it comes down to recognizing that we weren't as good as building a product from 0 to 1, from how to start from nothing,
Uh-huh.
from compared to taking a company or a business that have existing sales and metrics or data from going from 1 to 10. And so when you recognize that's your skill set and that your strength, then just focusing on taking companies from 1 to 10 is much better. So rather than, for example, in the future version of our business, rather than starting new brands or starting new companies, we think we're much better off acquiring or buying businesses to grow.
Yeah, I love that, and kind of resonates with your journey because you realized for a long time, kind of school system holds you back because it's you don't like. I find that the school system holds a lot of people back that are either very advanced or very entrepreneurial, and it's once you find that you can go to from instead of going from 0 to 1, as you said, going from 1 to 10 and doing your thing, you accelerate so much faster. It's quite interesting. And it's like advice for e-commerce businesses. And if you, for those looking to scale, what key pieces of advice would you offer, especially in terms of digital marketing and creative development?
Yeah. I think for e-commerce brands specifically, I think a large part of their growth really boils down to being really good with distribution. So a lot of founders start because they're really good with product, right? They find a sort of niche or an angle or a product because of their personal history. And so they develop a very effective and wonderful product. But usually distribution is sometimes where, at least for the brands that we meet with and the fact that they're hiring a marketing agency, boils down to having a skill gap. And so with any type of hires, and it's not necessarily restricted to marketing, it's usually really important to have a really strong foundational understanding of the field that you're about to hire in. And so whether if it's hiring accountants or lawyers, it helps to have a certain skill sets around so that you know what to ask and you know how to evaluate the companies that you hire. And so for brands that talk to us specifically, it usually helps when they have a baseline understanding of what the conditions are for what makes great marketing great. And so then that way they can really see why the things that we do are effective or why our approach makes sense. Whereas sometimes I think brands can sometimes feel like they get burned by agencies because, oh, the expert said so, and they don't really have a good skill or way to evaluate that. And it's not really their fault per se, but it's also their responsibility because as the business owner, you have to own that part of it. And so when you see brands that are very effective in distribution, it's because they understand the field that they hire really well.
Yeah. It's a very insightful piece of advice. Moving on to the future of digital marketing, because this year, digital marketing's changed so much with ChatGPT and AI. And in your opinion, what is the future of digital marketing and user experience design? And how should businesses prepare for these changes? How is your agency helping entrepreneurs position themselves at the forefront of this trend?
100%. So the thing to remember is to focus on the things that don't change, right? So consumer behaviors haven't changed. And so even there's the advent of AI or the advent of platform changes, people still buy online for the same reasons that bought 3 years ago or 4 years ago. And so what tools like AI has really changed and developed is the operational processes in the way that we create that information. And in our field specifically, a lot of the work that used to be handled and managed by junior copywriters or even intermediate copywriters, for example, has not gone away because the production capacity and the production speed
Yeah.
for tools like ChatGPT or replace any sort of AI tool has leveled the bar very quickly. And so the skill set for the creators, what used to be the creators, like at least, is on the burden of being good editors. So that if ChatGPT comes up with five different suggestions, it's up to you to know how to evaluate which one's more effective and which one's more appropriate for a particular situation or context. You can give it all the background and context, but if you look at, let's say, for example, the recent release of ChatGPT's feature set, it's GPTs, which is a lot about the context information that ChatGPT is not able to develop or able to supply. So you have to bring your own domain expertise into it. And so that's why that, at least in the near term, has not changed. So going back, remember that consumer behavior has not changed. So all the things used to work and say, for example, the principles of direct response marketing, that hasn't changed. People still respond to persuasion and sales in the way that they used to, but adapting to tools and methodologies and knowing how that impacts your business and the way that it reduces costs is very important. It's very paramount and to adapt to applying and changing the way that you approach the work that you do.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. It's these are just tools and you have to learn how to use them in certain contexts. So it's like up to us to utilize these. They say that ChatGPT is not going to take your job. It's the person that knows how to use all of these tools and put it together that's going to.
Abs- Absolutely. And we're still fairly early right now. And I think the
Yeah.
best analogy to think about is how big the internet had the impact on a lot of brick and mortar businesses. Brick and mortar businesses are still here today, but they're fundamentally changed with the introduction of the internet. And AI is here to stay. There's a lot of trends and I would say even fads that come and go. You look at crypto, you look at whatever else. It's there are a lot of things that come and go. But this is one of those things that has legitimate usage to our environment. It impacts across industries. And so it's really important for business owners to face this head on, adopt the different tools, but also get really good at it, right? There are people that are good with the internet and there's people that were not. And you can see a massive shift in the way that the world has capitalized on it and a lot of wealth was created. And we're about to see that happen with AI.
Yeah, it reminds me of like when COVID happened, all the restaurants shut down, and then the restaurants that use like Uber Eats or DoorDash and to go, and then they had outdoor seating. Those were ones that were thriving. You look at the restaurant business today. If you don't offer these to go or pick up or deliver, your SOL. All these other businesses have the scale of reach of the internet to get clients.
100%. And it goes back to what you're asking earlier about what it really comes down to being an entrepreneur. It's about dealing with the changes that, because like you're dealing with things that break down every day. There's always a new problem that you're addressing and facing with, and having that kind of like resilience to stomach that, and also being able to chart and navigate that, and also having a good mix of reasoning and your gut instinct of how to navigate those uncertainties, I think is a mark of a really excellent entrepreneur. And people that I look up to, the people that I respect, often are really good at making decisions in the face of uncertainty.
Yeah. Yeah. You also have a significant interest in real estate, and I'm curious, like, how are you using real estate? Is it more just like create passive income to, because you're obviously doing well with your agencies. A lot of people look to real estate to fire their job, but it sounds like you're not. Is it more just like alternative streams of income to preserve your wealth? Kind of talk about balancing this with your
Yeah,
entrepreneurship.
100%. And
Yeah.
so it got into it by accident. So going back to my earlier like introduction about reading Rich Dad Poor Dad, one of the
Yeah.
things that I was doing back then, I was because like I was a young kid, right? I was 19. I didn't know a lot of people that ran businesses, and so I
Yeah.
would go to networking events looking for people that sort of fit the profile of like the thing I was reading about, so I could ask them questions. And
Uh-huh.
so I was lucky in that I met a friend and dear mentor of mine now, where he built a large real estate portfolio. Back then, he had maybe 7 properties. Now he's at maybe like 20 million in assets. That was like maybe 2 or 3 years ago, a lot more now. But it all started with this asking, having those interactions with him. And so the thing about mentorships and advice is that you can talk and ask about things all day long, but until you take and follow said advice is when you
Uh-huh.
really like fully understand it. And so I got into an accident by accident in the sense that I was just asking him for advice about my finances. I was like, hey, here's the thing, here's my finances, and here's what it looks like. What would you do? And he said, here's what I would do. I would pay down off your debts. I would start saving up. And in the moment I have any type of money left over, I would go towards figuring out how to buy my first property. And so we
Uh-huh.
bought our first property together in 2011. And we bought four more ever since through different means and different ways. But nowadays, as I think about how I got into it versus how I think about it now, what I'm about to do for the next 10 years, is that I see the businesses that I run as cash flow generating businesses. It's
Yeah.
really important to have that. It also keeps my skill set sharp in being on the forefront of changes in technologies and what have you. But real estate is a very slow moving like business, right? It's very operational heavy and focused, but the skills don't really change over time that much. And I look at that as wealth preservation, exactly like you said, where there's a skill set and businesses that help generate wealth and a place to deploy it to. And we did fairly well for real estate in the grand scheme of things for what we basically knew back then, which was not much. And so when we bought properties back then, it was mostly doing joint ventures and buying properties to rent both locally and abroad outside of our. So I'm in Canada. So I'm in Canada. I live in Vancouver, but our properties in extra provincial provinces. And so nowadays, as we're getting back into the first 10-year cycle of the real estate boom and bust, now we're
Uh-huh.
looking forward to the next 10 years of how to acquire larger and larger properties. And so I think next time we go about this, rather than doing joint ventures, we're looking to raise a fund to acquire multifamily units. And that's what we're probably going to do for the next 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating because even a lot of my friends, like in the past, they were like, they were questioning like, why do they get into real estate? They have these high income jobs, but the younger generation understands that jobs are not going to always be there. So you have to have some way to preserve your wealth, and especially with inflation and taxes and debt and all of that. And real estate is kind of a way to hedge, and it's great. And they say that real estate is a sure thing, but it's a slow thing. And it's like you have to, if you take care of the property, you buy in a good location, it almost always appreciates, but it's slow. So it's yeah. Concluding, which is one interesting, is you were on the Canadian national team in Olympic Taekwondo. And how has your experience in sports influenced your approach to business and leadership? And how does personal growth and development mean to you as an entrepreneur and athlete?
Hmm. I love that question because I think about that a lot. And then I don't realize how important that was until
Uh,
I got into whatever I'm doing 5 or like years afterwards, right?
yeah.
I think what athletics have taught me at the time, and I was lucky because I was trained under an Olympic coach. I tried to work towards being Olympian, never made it. Ended up joining Team Canada for different occasions for different aspects of it. I was on the World University team in 2007 and 2011,
Uh-huh.
competing for Team Canada and also World Poomsae in 2006. But the progression for being in athletics have, especially in Canada, where there's not a lot of carded and professional athletes, you're doing it on a vocation. And it meant that whenever you get into any field, I think it taught me the persistence of grinding through long periods of a stretch without seeing immediate results. And I think when you look at business, a large part of it is you have a lot of scenario situations where you just want to throw in the towel. And
Uh-huh.
I think athletics could have forced me out of that. And so it made me really deeply question, what am I really doing it for? And it gave me a way to internalize and look within on how to find out my own answers instead of looking around and see what just doing what everyone else is doing. And so
Uh-huh.
it gave me that sort of sense of direction. I think that's one of like the really large thing. But the other piece that it taught me was that the a mark of entrepreneurship really comes down to talk about the overnight success. And then you see the meme of overnight success of 10 years of absolute nothing. And then like year 10 or year 11, you have a huge spark and growth. And
Yeah.
so in athletics, it caught me the similar thought where looking back, I got put into Taekwondo because my parents put me into martial arts, but I don't necessarily think that it was actually the best sport for whether if it's personality or skill sets or what have you. I think the ADHD, the psychological management part, was like, particularly challenging for me.
Uh-huh.
But I didn't know about that from a performance perspective at the time. But I stuck through it for so long that basically everybody else retired, or I just worked everybody, and it
Uh-huh.
gave me the sense that if you just did that in a lot of different fields, you can get to the 95th percentile or the 10th percentile to be world class, even if you're not at the top percentage. And I think that takes sort of different level of the right conditions, the right environment, the right people, and also the right sort of natural sort of conditions that make you a strong athlete. And so
Uh-huh.
even if you didn't have that by birth and you had everything else, you could still outwork and get really far. And I think the same could be said of business, where if you a lot of times it's just don't die in your company, in your business. If you can find ways to survive and get through the next payroll or the next thing to get to the other side, you see
Yeah.
a lot of things play out that way. And that happened certainly with us in real estate. We had a lot of near death experiences. It happened with our agency and the business that I started with my wife. And we've also had our best years because we grounded through the tough parts. And I think athletics really drove that into my head.
Yeah, I love that, and I love it's just because even like Neil Patel and just like, you see a lot of people they during pandemic and COVID they started all these podcasts and YouTube channel and it exploded, but then they just quit it. That if you like slow and steady, it's you're already outpaced them. Really interesting. If people want to find out more about you, check out your website, follow your social media, check out your agency, how can they do so?
Sure. So our agency is 2x.agency. So you can learn about us and our services there. I'm on Twitter. It's Twitter or X, whatever it is now. But the username is JTC Chan. You can look up John Chan, which is there's a lot of us. You can always find me on LinkedIn, but I'm always happy to connect with other entrepreneurs. And yeah, and I also want to go back to my initial thought of thanking you for doing what you do. It goes back to what I respect the fact that what 600 episode in, because it's easy to start something, but is it
Yeah.
very hard to maintain and be consistent over time? So a lot of respect to you as well.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, and I think it's also the athlete conditioning and the training. Just I love your idea. You don't have to be world class, but if you outwork everybody, you can be world class. So it's just kind
100%.
of
No, 100%. If you look at business, there's enough for everybody. We live in a world of abundance, so you don't have to be the best in a particular field of set. You can be good enough and still do very well in your finance and circumstance and the people around you.
yeah, yeah, I love that. For all the listeners out there listening, John for coming on. Be sure to follow him on all his socials. These will be in the links and the resources. And with that, thanks so much for coming on.